Morning, everybody.
Morning.
All right, so we'll get started over here. I just want to start by saying I had the pleasure of working with Karen at Knight Foundation for 2 years, and we had a lot of laughs, a lot of hard work together, and did a lot of good things together. So there's just one thing I wanted to say before we started. You left this in your desk. It's actually legitimately her umbrella on the desk. That's not even a joke. She did leave it.
And you'll need it in San Diego.
And she needs it today, which is even better. In all seriousness, though, so proud of I know the team is so excited to have you in this role, and it's great to be sitting next to you having this conversation. So let me start by immediately asking you a hard question.
Okay.
6 months in, you saw INN from the outside for many, many years as a funder, and now you're on the inside. What has surprised you about the organization? And those can be pleasant surprises, they can be less pleasant surprises. Kind of, how have you seen the role so far?
I think that I understand how outsiders view the value of the network, the 450 members, in a very different way. It's really powerful. INN's invited to the table because we work with so many newsrooms, so many members that are here today. And I think that's one thing for sure. And I think I always knew that the organizations were vetted to become members. I wanted to speak about that a little bit more in my opening remarks because I have heard from funders, oh, they're an INN member, so you know they're doing good journalism. This is a world where there's misinformation, disinformation. There are newsrooms that don't always know, there are funders that don't always know how to assess a newsroom. So I think having that badge confirms for folks that they were vetted. And then on the tough side, there are a lot of you. So, and different operating budgets, different communities, and members are not a quiet bunch. They are members, are frustrated by certain things, and they've come to me with things that they felt haven't worked. Say that.
Okay. And so I'm going to move this chair just up a little so I can actually see everybody. So Lorie, I mean, we know this is a hard business. You've been at it for how many years now?
We'll have our 15th anniversary in
15
October.
years. So I think the question a lot of us in the room keep wrestling with, which is there a model for what it is that we do? Is there a long-standing model that, even if it works economically, can work for people's lives, where they're not working 80 hours a week and running at that pace that I know you've been running at for 15 years. I know some of us who started our own things have lived that life as well, where you can make it work, but you're sacrificing something for making it work. And so it's a big, hard question I know we all wrestle with out there, is like, is local nonprofit journalism a viable model in all the ways something needs to be viable, psychologically, financially, and in terms of serving the community?
Whoa, okay. Well,
Start there.
Sorry.
there's certainly no magic answer. And I think when I look back over 15 years, it's startling to me to see how much things have changed, not just in the industry, but how audiences have changed, consumers, the whole arena of disinformation, misinformation, which we didn't see as much 15 years ago, and that boils up now. There's no sure financial model for sure. I think that a lot of what I take out of San Diego is being very flexible in terms of your thinking. Many of us came from traditional journalism. One of the things that has been hardest, I think, for some people who are from traditional journalism is to just get out of your own way. We tend to think that we are just going to do things the way that we've done them. And it's very uncomfortable to think about doing things differently. I often joke that journalists love to cover change. They love to cover everybody else's change. They love to cover entrepreneurial. They like to cover SpaceX. They like to cover all these great frontiers. But when you ask them to do anything different in their own workflow, it's like rebellion. So I think that When I say you have to get out of your own way, that's been a lesson for me. I've been a journalist my whole life and worked mainly for traditional news organizations. So starting and maintaining a nonprofit enterprise has been a big learning curve for me. I have discovered that I actually kind of like some of the chaos that goes on in that because it challenges you to think differently. But I think the message more than anything is to keep scanning the horizon and keep scanning what's around you to make sure that you are changing as your audience needs you to change. That yes, we still have to focus on capital J journalism. That's what we do. We do investigative accountability journalism at inewsource. But we're really taking a hard look at how we can integrate that investigative journalism much more in the community than we have previously. So that's just one example, I think, of how you have to be flexible in your approach.
How many people in the room have been doing this longer than 15 years? A handful, yeah. That's a pretty good number.
Yeah.
It's impressive. So, Chris, I wanted to ask you, I mean, again, this is a room full of people working in nonprofit.
What am I doing here?
Yeah, well, that wasn't where I was going with it, but so your career has been on the broadcast side and working for-profit entities, and that there's been a lot of discussion, certainly a lot of discussion in the philanthropic space about what is the future of local journalism, is it nonprofit, is it for-profit? I'm going to guess that you think the answer is it's got to be both. But talk a little bit about some of the things we talked about back in the room earlier about the revenue mix and the type of journalism that is produced kind of outside this room.
Yeah, and thanks for letting me crash the party. Thank you, Karen and Courtney, for the invite. Look, I've worked my entire career in commercial for-profit media, and it's quite simply different. And we were asked to be provocative on this session, and I want to give this a go. And what I want to tell you is it's an uneven playing field. It's just unfair to compare the work that's being done by independent publishers, not the work itself, but the actual revenue outcomes, for example, and audience outcomes to TV. And just to share some numbers with you, 2024, just 1 year here, and this is forecast since we're still in the middle of the year, the TV advertising forecast is $64 billion, right? That's not just local, but all of TV advertising. So that takes a lot of work to convince marketers to fork over $64 billion. But they do it, and they have robust sales organizations that get this work done. But what makes it supremely unfair are the other two major revenue lines. One is retransmission fees, which we've talked about, cable and satellite companies that pay TV broadcasters for the right to carry their signal on their cable system, right? Without the NBC station and the CBS station and ESPN, they don't get, and ESPN's not a local broadcaster, but all of those TV companies receive $14 billion a year in retransmission fees. And then third is political advertising, which every other year delivers billions of dollars directly to the bottom line. And now that money goes directly to local, mostly local TV. So this year, the forecast for political advertising is $11.1 billion. So all told, just doing some simple math there, that's 89 billion versus 600 million, which I think is what the index showed that the total revenue is for I&M members. So it's not a competition. It's just what the landscape is, right? And so, Lorie, you asked me a question. Here, I'm putting it up on a tee for you when we were discussing these numbers earlier.
I told you I was going to ask you. So how do we get some of that money? how do we level, at least try to bring some balance to that playing field?
Yeah. So I think TV has gotten disrupted now for more than a decade. Let's say they figured out ways to with the advent of the social web to sort of stay relevant, but now that's changed and they're really going into connected TV over the top to reach audiences that don't watch in linear fashion, right? But they're still shedding audience. So here's another number for you. In about the last 10 years, let's just look at 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. day parts where there are local newscasts on the air. Viewership has declined by 65%. right? And it's not just for news. Watching any TV at all at 6 p.m. and at 11 p.m. has declined by 65%. Yet video consumption is at an all-time high, right? Because the rise of YouTube as a primary source and others. That's why you see Reels as such a priority for Instagram, et cetera. So I think that the opportunity is to capture audience as they stray from TV. And the way you do it is through the quality journalism that's being produced. Because in all of the quantitative research, we did 50 quantitative research studies at Univision from 2019 to 2023 or so, really getting into the mind of our audience. And accountability journalism came up time and time again. Investigative, digging, in-depth content, which is the work that all of the INN members are producing. So, there's some tactics that we could discuss that could make sense. But I think collaboration, Karen, to your point, has to be a strong pillar. But you have to capture that audience as they migrate away from linear TV. They still want most valuable content.
And do you think, Lorie, I'll throw this one at you. Do you think part of the reason that money hasn't come our way is that we as an industry, especially in the nonprofit space, are still struggling to figure out how to approach advertisers at that scale to try to get them to come from broadcast to online? Or do you think that, I guess let me ask the question another way. Do you think what Chris is suggesting is actually possible the way we're structured today? Small staffs, not massive revenue generating staff in a lot of places?
I think some of it's possible. I think we just have to be smarter in how we deal maybe with commercial media. Everybody says content is king, right? So we all have the content. So how are we going to exploit that to get some of the revenues? Mm-hmm. We've had relationships with commercial television. We haven't had much luck, if at all, in having them pay us for content. So I think that's kind of a non-starter. Even though they have lots of money, they say they don't have a lot of money. So I think there have to be other ways to leverage that content and get in front of their audiences. They have big audiences on digital too.
Yes, they do.
So it's not just people who are watching TV. Their digital audiences are great. So I think we just have to figure out how we can make better deals and leverage our value and how we can talk about our value proposition much more keenly than we clearly do now, because we have a much harder time, again, getting a piece of that pie. And the way advertisers look at it is it's all about page views, right? And we all tend to measure our impact differently. It's not all about page views. It's about impact on people's lives. It's about laws that change. It's about, big initiatives that benefit the public. And we often don't tell our story very well. I think marketing, if it's on anybody's budget, it's really small. We've never been very good at marketing ourselves. And I think we really have to tell our story better, like how we do the stories. If we're doing our job correctly, the big investigation we do reads really simply. And people read it and think, well, that was easy, unless you put the paragraph in there that says, after reviewing 1,000 documents, which still doesn't begin to tell the story, right? People want to relate to the people who did the investigation. They want to know exactly how it works. And we're not good at that. And I think we have to get a lot better at doing that and figuring out how we can intersect with some of these other audiences in telling our story.
Yeah. Karen's heard me say this before, but one of the things that was fascinating about when newspapers were 30% margin businesses, they were able to both be a place that could aggregate eyeballs because of all these amazing features they had in the paper that were not big, heavy news. They might be high school sports or comics or obits or whatever. And then when the investigative story did get dropped in there, it was dropped in front of hundreds of thousands of eyeballs. And so the impact was massive. And we seem to have a system now that separated those things. We have high traffic, like even a lot of the newspapers that still exist in a lot of cities still drive a fair amount of traffic, but they're not really doing the investigative work a lot of people in this room are doing now. But you're facing an audience problem, which is you don't have that daily traffic that used to drive that sort of beautiful outcome when that investigative story said. So we have an audience problem, don't we? In this,
Absolutely.
In the nonprofit space and also in many for-profit areas too. But in a lot of cases, they have different ways to go after traffic and are doing a kind of journalism that has more of a daily heartbeat than maybe a lot of folks are able to do in investigative. So how serious is our audience problem, and how do we attack that?
So, I mean, we know that there is news avoidance. And to be clear, this is an election year. This is when the public comes to news. They're interested in finding out what's important. I also want to say, too, that, we're now at 48% members are local. The locals at the baseline, they start out municipal government, K through 12 education, arts and culture. Arts and culture is a way to bind community. People come to this work because they need to see a value. They need to see themselves in it. So some of it is engagement work. We've been doing a lot of coaching around, Sam Choki has been doing a lot of coaching around audience, but I do want to share that in an upcoming index report, INN members are spending 1% of their budget on audience and bringing an audience. And we know that there are financial challenges, but that's not where the focus is.
Yeah. How many people in the room have seen, who are operating sites, just have seen an increase in audience this year? Let's just say, okay. How many have seen a decrease? Okay, so this year has been so far so good, an election year. And obviously how the election turns out might create another news surge, I guess, put it lightly, based on what happened 8 years ago. I'm curious about that 1% number of the folks in the room who are actually spending on audience. And I'm going to do another quick audience survey here. How many people have someone dedicated to audience completely?
The Jim Index.
So a couple, audience direct, one person who just does that. Okay, like probably 50 or so. How many have somebody who does it as part of another job? So most of the room. So curious, because that does seem to be the challenge, because I think this research has shown if you have somebody who is focused on audience, that does tend to provide better outcomes, but the economic problem is still there. Laura, do you have somebody who focuses on audience as a primary thing? How do you manage that as one example?
We do. We have a product manager and we have a social media person, but I would argue that yes, maybe you need an audience person who can help strategize, although that needs to come from the entire leadership group. But I think building audience is everybody's job.
Yeah.
It's not just, you just don't hire an audience person and say, go increase our page views, go figure out why our bounce rate's so high at the website. I mean, maybe somebody can do that, but go engage with the community. I mean, I think maybe you need someone to help lead that effort, but it absolutely has to be everybody's job. And sometimes that can be really uncomfortable for reporters because they kind of like to stay at arm's length, certainly from some of their sources, or feel like they're being promotional, but people like to relate to people. So I think that the audience building needs to be culturally across the newsroom. I think that's one of the issues about hiring an audience person and then expecting that they're going to do all the work.
I would encourage everybody to have, if you don't have a robust marketing strategy, you have to implement one, right? I mean, obviously, the product is content, right? But you have to be able to talk about your content to audiences to at least get them into the funnel and then drive them down, right? And then, so marketing, at the very least for awareness, right?
The resources are always an issue, and that's, I think, one reason why we don't have line items for marketing.
But the other piece of it, you don't always have to pay for your marketing. So I think about today with the rise of over-the-top content. So if you take like Graham owns 7 TV stations in the country. Anybody here from Detroit, Jacksonville, Orlando, right? So in Detroit at WDIV, they've launched their Plus channel. And guess what their aim is? They want to be on the air at 24 on the air. Showing my age here. They want their stream to be on 24 hours a day. Now they're simulcasting their local newscasts, which is easy, right? So if you do 43 hours a week of that, that still leaves 125 hours you have to fill with some type of content. And what they're doing is creating original content. And I think there's a place for, and again, I'm just using them as an example, but all the other broadcasters are also moving into the streaming space, is they need content. They need high quality content. They need you, but you have to make it work for you, right? So if you don't have a marketing budget or a revenue line for that, or an expense line for that rather, I would say do what you do best and then partner for the rest, right? Like find a partner that just to meet the marketing goals that you have as a way to grow audience. Not to make it sound too simplistic. We know it takes a lot of work, but just know that there's opportunity out there from these local companies that need high quality content. They need you.
Do you think the new model that
I
you're...
want to add that
Oh, yeah.
to that too, saying that it's not just those kinds of partners, but it's like community partners, organizations that are in your community that you can use them as, once you build relationships with them, they can help you do some of the marketing with their considerable networks. So it also is a way to get your journalism more grounded in community, but a lot of those community organizations can kind of be helpful, and it's not all up to you to figure out how to market yourself.
Yeah. And that new model you're talking about, the over-the-top model, Chris, is that going to put would that put broadcasters in a position where they might be willing to pay for the kind of content that Lorie was mentioning before? You had a local relationship, but it didn't throw any revenue your way because they were unwilling to pay, it sounds like. Is that model going to change potentially?
Did you have the discussion about Peña?
Okay? Oh yeah,
And they just flat out said no.
we don't have money.
We don't have money.
They don't have money.
It's all relative,
and then,
right?
And then you're in this position of you want to get their audience. So in
Right.
the end, you just say, okay, we'll just work with you. Maybe you'll give us some CTAs on your website or, whatever. I mean, sometimes it's usually a trade thing, but
Yeah, I think it's.
Let me ask a more pointed question, then get to the one you just had. Is she making a mistake? Is anybody here who goes out and negotiates with local TV and they want to get their content out there, is that a mistake to say, take it for nothing? Do you think?
Yes. Do not give away your content.
yeah, we're not doing that anymore.
Right.
You just can't, because I'll put myself in there. We will gladly take your amazing investigative content and cross-post it on our website and interview you on a show and even give you credit on screen, but we're not really worried about what that yields for you, right? It's for a morning show producer that's producing 2.5 hours of news from 4:30 to 7 a.m. They're looking to fill time. And if the content happens to be really good, that's a cherry on top, right? But I would not give it away. Every conversation around collaboration has to start with some real outcomes that you want to achieve from it. Not just here, please take our content, and then we'll see what that gives us.
Yeah. Well,
We also know too that people who hear a really good story or see a good story online or on TV, they remember the story.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily remember the source. So if we're giving it away for free, that's diluting your brand even more.
And not to make you feel bad, Lorie, I did exactly the same thing with Billy Penn, gave it away for free. And it was just like, I want to get the name out there. And at some point that doesn't, saying that my name is out there doesn't pay the bills, doesn't pay the rent. And that was
But that falls into the category of trying things and failing.
and getting out, right.
Which I think is an important part of this discussion, that you can't be afraid to
Yeah.
try some things and then pull the plug if they're just really not working.
Yeah, and I want to go back. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say, the question I asked initially was, that model makes it more likely to pay because there's just more time to fill in now, and there's probably less original content?
Yeah, there are fewer journalists. Recruiting TV journalists is getting more and more difficult because, there are 212 media markets in the United States. And you take the bottom 100 of those, what are they paying as a starting salary, right? Many people, many journalism graduates are choosing not to go into broadcast media because they can't live, they can't survive in that. So, and then retaining the employees you have. Again, when people are not receiving merit raises year over year, saw a lot of people leave for more lucrative jobs, whether at another broadcaster or just completely out of the business when I was at Univision. So the need for communities to have trust content they can trust, that adds value to their life, that comes with context, that's not going away. And I think the time is going to be right, particularly after the elections, when I think TV budgets are going to decline even further post-election. I hope that's not the case, but that's all the murmurs that I hear. That it's an opportunity. I was even thinking, is there an opportunity for inewsource to license their content to multiple outlets in San Diego and other places throughout California, like a sort of a B2B play as opposed to just a partnership play. Again, the experimentation, and not just inewsource, any other publisher, to think about your business, not just in a B2C way, but maybe in a B2B where, is there anyone from the AP here? But essentially acting as a wire.
Yeah. So Karen, on the, if we look forward 15 years and everybody in this room is still publishing, but there is no longer really a robust for-profit sector in local journalism, have we been successful or have we failed as an industry?
Oh my goodness. Wow.
We were supposed to ask hard questions.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I'm not really ready to say that yet. Obviously, I'm bullish on nonprofit news. I think we want community-minded, mission-focused ownership who will circle around and support the values that we've been talking about. I think I'll just say this. There's something called Press Forward, which some of you have heard of.
Really?
And so that is, funding, attention, a campaign. I think in the next 5 years, there will be other solutions. Some of you in this room will invent them. Some of you in this room will partner with others who invent them. I think they will come. I think right now, policy is on the table. I think there are many nonprofit newsroom leaders who've talked to me about how do we get money back from the platforms. That's come up. I think there are different levers that haven't been pulled yet, and people are thinking about them in a lot of different spaces. It could be that there's a completely new model that emerges. I don't have a problem with for-profits continuing to provide good journalism. I know that the folks that sit in this room are, focused on the community, and because you're a 501c3, you can't endorse political candidates. That's something really important to note as we move into a particularly polarized world. And ultimately, we're all here because we want the public to be informed. That's it.
Lorie, I'm curious, having been in the nonprofit space now for a while, when you look at the for-profit players in San Diego, for example, I know you've tried to work with on the TV side, but in general, do you think they're serving very different needs? Do you see a potential future where a market like San Diego could be all nonprofit news organizations and still serve all the various constituencies in a city of this size?
This is a provocative question that we did not discuss in advance. As I think as Karen's talking, and I imagine a world without for-profit journalism, does that mean the New York Times doesn't exist anymore? The Washington Post? I mean, I think it will be hard for all for-profits not to withstand economic pressures and everything else, and figuring out audience engagement and that sort of thing. But I look at San Diego, for example, the Union Tribune, when I was there 15, 20 years ago, we had 400 people in the newsroom. Today they have about 70. And they've been sold 5 times since I left the paper in 2009, and most recently to Alden Capital. And we all know about Alden Capital, and overnight we had buyouts, a substantial number in the newsroom. We were able to pick up 2 people who took buyouts from the Union Tribune, and I wish I had a lot more money to hire more of those folks who have institutional memory and a lot of experience. I don't know if outfits like Alden and Gannett and McClatchy are going to be able to withstand 5 or 10 or 15 more years of sucking out profits at the expense of news and community. But if they can't, that's a huge mandate. I believe it's a huge responsibility for nonprofit news to try to figure this out. We in San Diego have been talking a lot about, how are we going to deal with the shrinking amount of local news there is in San Diego because of what's happened to the Union Tribune and will continue to happen. So I think I'm somebody who's very involved in Rebuild Local News, for those of you who aren't familiar with that. If you had asked me even 5 years ago if I was in favor of government funding for news, I would say, are you kidding me? And here I am, actually sort of starting to lobby, which makes me uncomfortable, but I know it's incredibly necessary for some of the legislation that's pending in California. And we are a recipient of a government-funded newsroom reporter. So I think that some of those kinds of funding...
Could you just explain that for the government funding?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
In California, the legislature passed a $25 million portion of its budget 2 years ago, and that was to go to to funding local journalism. And in essence, the way the money was spent was fellowships were formed through the University of California, Berkeley, and all these kind of emerging younger reporters were accepted into the fellowship program, and they were placed in newsrooms who applied. And we basically have a reporter who's employed by UC Berkeley, and we pay a small portion of the salary. So it's almost like getting a free reporter for 2 years. My concern is what happens after the 2 years. Either the government funding will be re-upped, or we as a nonprofit need to figure out how we're going to backfill that salary because this person is a really valuable reporter. So I think that the different kinds of revenue streams and some of the ones that may have just completely turned us off a few years ago, like government funding, are things I think we really have to examine and see if we can come to peace with some of it. So I can't answer that big landscape question. I just know that if for-profit journalism, even as bad as it is in a lot of communities or shells of itself, is still providing something. If that goes away, we're going to be really in a world of hurt unless we're backfilling behind it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is the only model of its kind, but the Chicago public media model to me is different than any other I've seen, where they were always primary platform was WBEZ radio, but then acquired the Chicago Sun-Times really to save it from oblivion. And I think there are a nonprofit within the nonprofit, but that's a really interesting model when we start talking about consolidation. And at least initially, it seems to be a positive because it saved the local newspaper and I think a few hundred local jobs and prevents Chicago from being a one newspaper town still. But so I don't know how everybody else feels about that. I see it as a positive. I don't know what the results have been, but it seems like at least a good attempt at an experiment and a new way of doing things.
Yeah. Chris, I did want to ask you on the TV. I mentioned earlier that the old model of the newspaper where they had the daily and the sort of big enterprise work that in one place, which was great, and it drove massive traffic. But the truth is, in most markets now, the largest website in terms of audience is almost always a television station site now, right? That's in all the Graham markets, because I also did some consulting for Graham. They were number one, I think, in all, or if they weren't, another TV station was number one digitally in every one of the markets. What has TV figured out about audience that those who come more out of maybe a lot of people in this room, I assume, came up from the print side? Like what is it that TV has figured out that we need to really imbue in the way we work?
It's just kind of fallen into their lap, which is breaking news and severe weather. Yeah. Right? And
promotion.
A lot of promotion on their own platform, yes. But the events that led to the most push notification click-throughs, most app downloads, most audiences are severe weather, right? That is when everybody tunes in, and then of course breaking news. And the fact is that everyone is time starved today, and so if there's breaking news or severe weather, and you happen to be stuck at work, you're not watching TV, you're on a digital platform. So that they've been able to scale because they obviously are part of much larger groups. So their cost base ends up being lower because they can centralize many of the functions. But again, it's the content. At Univision, we also had a lot of success with horoscopes on the website. I know, and it sounds like kind of weird as a news person. I was like, why is there a horoscope? But it drove a ton of audience without, we've talked about the New York Times and their brand still being news, right? But the fact is that they have a lot of audience and revenue from non-news digital products, right? So TV has been able to experiment and maintain video focus, right? Because they do produce video, and then video produces higher CPMs than your static banner ads, right? So on streaming today, the CPMs are around 50, right? On websites, it's been around 30 to 36 for a while. So again, just having that advantage to be able to clip stories, clip newscasts, and then also have a lot of success with the YouTube platform, right? And that sort of auto revenue generation in the past few years has been critical for them.
How about the personality side of things too? One of the things that fascinated me in consulting with TV stations is how the audience would always talk about how much, oh my God, I love X personality, someone they've never met, someone they have no knowledge of what their life is like outside of what they do in front of the camera. But there's this affinity people have for personalities that kind of is not really something that the digital world has ever done. Like we've never really done that very well. To we tried it, Billy Penn, with lots of events so that people would know our reporters personally, and that definitely made them more likely to give as a member. Are we missing the opportunity to drive more of turn these folks into bigger personalities inside their own markets than they may be in some cases? Or I know it's uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Time and time again, just research comes. It has to be done authentically, right? And too many news anchors. We're in San Diego, right? Home of Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, Ron Burgundy.
Exactly. Too many of them, it's time for the news. And that doesn't resonate with digital audiences. The ones that have had the most success are the ones that are very relatable, and in fact can make fun of themselves. But that's how they're able to build connection. And again, there are some, if you scan around your local TV stations here, I bet I could pick out the ones who are more likely to have digital success just by watching them on TV. So if finding those people on your team, it may not even be one of your reporters, right? It may be someone who is just really good with social media and can speak authentically to audiences.
Is it an insane idea to look at the model of finding someone who worked in TV and market for a long time and helping them with the marketing of the work that you do as a digital startup to just help them get the word out because of their connections and their knowledge of the...
Absolutely, and I also think it's that person could help multiple organizations, right? There are a lot of similarities in marketing. You don't, one person, let's say, could help with marketing strategy for 5 to 6 to 10 independent news publishers. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's do some Q&A. So I don't know if you want to assemble those mics on both sides here. So if anyone wants to get up and lead us off. I see Brant making a move to the mic over there. So Brant, why don't you go first since you're closest?
Yeah, first of all, it's just great to see all these people. 15 years ago, there were about 20 groups that got together to get this going. So it's not only great to see you, but to me, you're on the cutting edge. You're the leading edge. One of the things I think is important is we look forward. We keep going backwards, talking about newspapers and TV stations. I teach at the University of Illinois. My students don't have anything to do with any of this. I think we need to talk about mobile, and we need to talk about one-to-one relationships. And the other thing is we need to talk about earned income. And I loved what Chris said. We got to get people to pay for what we do. And I love the licensing idea. Yeah. So I think we're got to look forward a little more and lead the way. So
I agree with
thank you for all the comments.
That was part of the idea of asking the question about personality is now on these platforms like TikTok where people are going. It's like that personality piece is crucial. And getting on TikTok and reading the lead of the story that you just wrote about some local mayor doing something bad that itself is probably not going to be a huge hit on TikTok. So how do you figure out how to tell that story in a way that engages in a platform that people just are reading totally differently than a newspaper? So
the topic that I think everyone else in the world is talking about, but I haven't heard yet mentioned today is AI and the challenges of, quite honestly, Google, which has benefited from the work of journalists for many years now without much compensation, is now actually just putting our work straight up on its website under search results. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, I think, for the threat that AI poses for scraping our content and pulling the work of our journalists for its own profit. I'm wondering what any of you know about that, what any of you think about that. Obviously, some people are, some large media organizations are filing lawsuits, but certainly those of us with 7-person staff and a pro bono lawyer aren't doing that. So interested in hearing what you have to say about that.
Who wants to tackle AI?
Oh boy.
There's a whole panel on it today or tomorrow. I think that we have to we're never going to, I don't know, I'm not going to say never. It's really hard to go up against the bigs. But I think we have to be smart about using AI ourselves to make our work processes more efficient, to build in things that are going to help us do reporting more quickly and efficiently. I'm not suggesting we should be having AI just write stories for us, but I think there are a lot of places where we need to get ahead of AI ourselves and be involved in those processes. We just can't sit back and wait till somebody provides a platform or a thing. I think we need to really be paying attention to what startup companies are doing and what kinds of pieces are out there for us to participate in. That doesn't answer the big question about what do we do about Google or what do we do about Meta, but I think we need to engage with AI whether we like it or not.
I think you have to stand up to them. Easier said from where I'm sitting, right? But once you give it away, it's gone. We've seen that, and you may not be able to do it all by yourself if you're a 7-person, and then we know there are even smaller newsrooms than that. But again, like, is there an opportunity to combine forces and stand up for your value there? I'm throwing, that's a question. It's not an answer, but that's how I would go about it.
Yeah.
I just want to say that you're not the only publisher who has sort of brought that up as a question and a place that we need to think about collectively. This is a large room. This is a large membership, and there's some that are taking that very seriously. If you want to talk about it more one-on-one, I'd love to hear sort of your reflections. There are, obviously, the New York Times, for instance, has taken a pretty strong stance on AI and what they think about it. They're nonprofit leaders. I know a few at larger organizations who are trying to get their point of view and their thoughts and shape a list of needs and concerns so that we're all armed with that. So I would say we're still a little bit early in that, but I'm happy to speak afterwards.
Are a lot of people in the room using AI to do routine tasks at this point? Like, to raise your hand if you're kind of using it for, yeah. Right now, somebody just said, like, literally while we're standing here. Good to see. Okay. We got a lot of questions, so let's do them short.
Sure. Nadine Luring, Proof News. On the topic the last two folks just asked about, this question of audience and where people are. And traditional news, many of us are talking about, is not where Gen Z, where millennials, where people are actually getting their news much anymore. Would love to hear thoughts from the panel around, are we creating the right content? When we think about creators versus journalists, YouTube, TikTok, what does the audience, what do people want and what do they trust? And how do you think about kind of the disruption in journalism around these questions?
We're definitely generationally fragmented. I don't think that anybody would be surprised by that. I think ultimately you have to know who the audience is that you're trying to serve and where they are, where they prefer to be. And the best publishers are aggressive about putting their content where people want to be, where people prefer. I'll just tell a little anecdote, a little story from my real life. I have a daughter who is a Taylor Swift fan, and she was on TikTok, and she was scrolling through, and she heard that there was seismic activity after one of her concerts. And I was like, that's ridiculous. I did not believe it. And I said, who's the source? Immediately. And she says, the news. And she brings me, TikTok, and there are anchors sitting at a desk. And so I was like, so I go to my old lady sources and I look until, and I was like, oh my gosh, this really happened. So, she informed me, but she was on TikTok engaging and discovering seismic activity after a concert. That's news.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying there is generational diversity. It really does depend uniquely on where you are, who you are trying to reach, what sort of community you want to build. But yes, behaviors and choices about where you find your news is shifting.
We're going to go back and forth here, and then we're going to have to do a little bit of lightning round because I think we're down to 5 minutes. But go ahead, fire away, and one person on the panel will answer.
Good morning. My name is Derek Kane. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Resolve Philly. I wanted to direct my question to you about broadcast when you mentioned earlier about how you shouldn't or you don't suggest people give their content to broadcast for free. What do you do in a situation like at Resolve? Our mission is to bridge the information divide. And with the broadcast, the reach is, when we have these great stories and real in-depth stories from communities, we want to spread the word. So in order for us to bridge that digital divide, we need that audience. What do you suggest we do? Because I feel like holding that information back in order to get paid for it, we're doing our Philadelphians a disservice. So what do you suggest in that situation?
It's a great question, Derek. And what I would say is have a goal in mind in advance of you sharing your content, right? Like, what do you want the outcome of appearing on the local TV stations to be after the appearance, right? Like, how do you measure closing the divide? Is it that suddenly your page views are going to increase as a direct result by 500, 5,000, 50,000? I don't know. You get to decide what a good enough metric is there, but just doing it is an activity, right? And that in itself might ultimately be good, but just have a measure of success in mind as you go. And again, that is getting value in return. It's not always monetary value.
My name's Randall Yip. I'm with Asian American Media, Inc. and a member of the USC Ethnic Media Collaborative. My question is actually very similar to his. Is we talk about not giving away local content. Does that apply to nonprofit news organizations giving away local content to other nonprofit news organizations?
I'm the for-profit guy, so.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at. I mean, I'm the moderator, so I'm not supposed to answer, but I will. Which is, I think it's the same. I think it's what's the goal. If the goal is to make sure you're better serving your community and you're going to reach new communities by sharing content for free, and that helps build your goal, great. If the goal is I need to make $10,000 more this year to be profitable, and the audience gains are going to be nominal, but you think you can make some revenue for it. But I think you have to look at them all separately. But clearly, getting information coursing through as much of the local ecosystem as you can is the ultimate goal. But it's a goal that will mean nothing if you can't stay in business and keep doing it. So I think you have to assess the situation that you're in at any given time. That what is the need? Is it audience? Is it revenue? Is it absolute public need to get this information to everybody where that trumps everything else?
What I do also want to say, we're 15 years in, right? We're not, in the span of history, that's not the longest amount of time, but 15 years is still, it's still early sort of in this movement. And we don't want to be cannibalizing each other either. I said at the beginning of this, like, our power is in the collective. I think you have to be strategic. It's all about the goals and the outcomes that you want, and you have to choose good partners.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that I'm Christian Mader, founder of The Current in Lafayette, Louisiana. So I've talked to a lot of other publishers who are about the same age as mine, just 5 or 6 years old, and they're still, in a lot of cases, without business support staff of any kind. And it strikes me a lot of what you guys are talking about are problems for business minds to solve. And so I'm curious, what are we going to do about that? There are programs, right, that are addressing talent gaps on the editorial side, but are we addressing talent gaps on the actual business operational side for news operations that are small and struggle to actually pull those resources together?
And is that something that could be funded perhaps by philanthropy?
I didn't want to say that was the subtext of my question, but it is.
Well,
yeah. Can I have some money, please, for that?
No, but Jim, I think
Is this the point where I open this and say, make it rain?
Let's make it rain, exactly. There you go.
No, you can't open an umbrella inside.
I will say this. One of the major things that we have talked about with potential grantees, but also internally, is like we have to come up with a model, I think, in local media where there's, for lack of a better term for now, like fractional resources that can help folks out in the room when they need a very specific thing, but only for a short period of time. Yeah. Whether that's to help develop a business plan and like actually help them go through the steps of saying, I need to build a budget for next year that makes sense. Like, can philanthropy help provide those resources to people in a fractional way so that you're not incurring the entire annual cost of that position, but you're getting expertise when you need it. So I'm curious, is that something folks in this room feel like could be a valuable thing? So that is something we've talked a lot about, and you'll hear something soon. And I think we are unfortunately have 3 people left, and we're out of time. Courtney, is that right? All right, I'm getting the big nods. So feel free to come up and ask the panelists questions right up here for the 3 of you who didn't get to the mic. I'm sorry. And I think we're out of time.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.